GSA, the County of Monterey, and of course, Monterey County Water Resources Agency. My name is R. Asharian. I'm the General Manager of the Water Resources Agency, and here today is our Senior Hydrologist, Ben Woodrow. And then I will pass it down to our kind host. That would be you.
All right. Well, good morning, everybody, or good afternoon. Rem Scherzinger, Marina Coast Water District General Manager. Thank you for taking the time and meeting with us today and supporting the deep aquifer and this well component of what we have been trying to accomplish. We've been doing that in concert with Salinas Valley Basin, which is kind of the progenitor or the clearinghouse for all of it. Thank you.
Hey, good afternoon. Joette Harman, Salinas Valley Basin GSA. So as you know, we have those 6 sub-basins that are all, I refer to them as my kids, our kids, all equally special but unique at the same time. And what makes it more complicated is the deep aquifers are not, they don't belong to one sub-basin. They're underneath several of them, so make things more complicated. Many jurisdictional agents above ground, the sub-basins, it's all kind of sharing the challenge, but hopefully, because with many of us, we can come up with a solution that helps to keep those aquifers just.
Hi everyone, I'm Sarah Hartgrave, Deputy General Manager with Salinas Valley Basin GSA. Here with Brett and all of these fine folks. And one of my primary assignments is the 180-400 foot aquifer sub-basin. So I've been helping to facilitate this group and will be helping with the presentation. Thanks, my conference earlier.
Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you for coming. My name is Rick Encarnacion, Bureau Chief of the Environmental Bureau, County of Monterey. I'm here with my colleague, Mr. Roger Van Horn. We're responsible for issuing the well permits.
Roger Van Horn, the supervisor of the well program, and we are in charge of issuing all the well permits for that.
Okay, so I'm going to be giving a lot of these slides that wanted to say a couple things about this. What we have to share with you today has really been a group effort. I think for those of you in the room, these are probably things you've been tracking for a while. And what we really wanted to do today was we're set up in kind of a formal way with this table and these placards, but we're really wanting this to be a little bit more of a conversation. And sharing information with you about the things that we've been discussing and doing since the deep aquifer study was published. And we have a memorandum. What we're going to go through today is a summary of a memo that we've got on our website. The agency has it on their website, Marina Coast, I believe you do as well. And then just to start a conversation about the recommendations that we're sharing with you today, and to talk some about what are some interim management activities and some long-term pathways for us related to the deep aquifer. So I'm going to go through this part of the slide of the presentation relatively quickly. I know that many of you. This is a conversation really that's a continuation of discussions that started in 2017 when Water Resources Agency issued a report related to seawater intrusion. And one of the recommendations was investigating the deep aquifers. And that was followed by some actions by the county that eventually led to our agency helping to facilitate the preparation of the deep aquifer study. We oversaw the work, but it was jointly funded by quite a few different entities, including the agency, the county, Marina Coast Water District, but also City of Salinas, Catskill Community, Services District, and then all of the irrigated agricultural contributions that were funded through I don't even remember quite the funding mechanism, but you all also contributed to the study. And it was completed in the spring of 2024, presented to all of the boards of all of the agencies up here represented. And since that time, this group has been reviewing it, discussing it, looking at aspects of the current information that's come in since the study, and that's really where we are today. Fine. So, big picture, why are we concerned? This is the purpose of why we're here. We have been monitoring the groundwater levels in the deep aquifers in a new way, really over the last seven-ish years since SIGMA, since the first groundwater sustainability plan was implemented. We have seen declines in the groundwater levels, and where the deep aquifers had been artesian and had an upward gradient, there's been a reversal of that trend with the groundwater flow downward from the 400, and just sort of the gradient is shifted with additional wells having been put in. And the current conditions that we see is that there is some vulnerability to seawater intrusion, especially in the areas where there's seawater intrusion overlying the deep aquifers. So that's the focus area for some of the things we'll talk about here. So under the Sustainable Groundwater Management Act, which I see some new faces, not all of the same people that come to many of our Groundwater Sustainability Agency meetings. So if you're unfamiliar with any of the terminology, please just let us know. But we've been doing the required annual reporting to the Department of Water Resources, including on the deep aquifers, and then in the January 2025, submitted a 5-year evaluation to the state. And in all 5 years that report covered, the groundwater levels were below the minimum threshold, which is a significant it's an undesirable result, but the consecutive years is particularly concerning. And that also corresponded with undesirable results for seawater intrusion. The Castroville Seawater Intrusion Project, your Monterey County Water Recycle Project, which really slowed the rate of seawater intrusion. We've recently been trying to make that point to the state a little more clearly, but there has been some incremental expansion of the acres that are considered to be included. So the Deep Aquifers study identified, I think, 7 different areas where there were some gaps in the spatial coverage of our monitoring network. And so both Marina Coast Water District and the Salinas Valley Basin have been constructing new deep wells. Salinas Valley Basin has put in 5, Marina Coast has put in 3 just in the last couple of years. And so that really has helped to fill some of those data gaps that had been identified by the study. And it's going to help us to continue to monitor and develop better calculations and data understanding of the deep aquifers. And so late last year, also as part of the efforts of this group, the Water Resources Agency developed a monitoring plan to help cover that larger, broader geographic area. And again, that's part of why we have all of the different agencies up here, because the deep aquifers do span multiple jurisdictions. There's multiple entities that are collecting data, so we're wanting to work together. And then I just want to follow up on my point about the data gaps. You'll see on the map 2 circled areas. Those are the 2 remaining data gap areas that where we eventually would like to put in additional monitoring wells. But we have been able fill quite a few of the ones that had been identified in the study with the 8 new wells that have been constructed. And the monitoring is, sorry, the monitoring covers both extraction, so all of the pumping data that you all report to the Water Resources Agency is part of the monitoring. And then in the seaside area, they're doing injection into the deep aquifers, so that's also incorporated into the monitoring and factoring in the overall extraction and injection balance, groundwater elevations, and then some monitoring for seawater intrusion. And that's going to be an annual process of getting together with all the different agencies that compiled and collect data in the deep aquifers to review the findings. And then that will also be included in our annual report. So this memo that we've written as a collaborative effort, it builds on the deep aquifer study. It creates some structure for how we're managing the deep aquifers across the different agencies that have authorities and jurisdiction. And we've identified some interim measures. We've identified some potential long-term projects. We've really strengthened our local monitoring coordination. And then, you know, the pathways for implementation of these things is all within the existing authorities of all of the agencies represented. So I'm going to pause. Any questions on the group discussion on those activities we've been doing in the last couple years? I'm going to just check to see if there are any online hands raised. We do have 45 people watching, just so that you know the scale of the audience. We do have a hand raised. Mr. Light, would you like to ask a question?
Yeah, thank you. Thank you, Chair, I guess, whoever's chairing the meeting, and thank you, Sarah, for the report. And I know all this stuff is based on 2025, but you know, I'm curious as to whether or not you or the agency integrated a lot of the studies that were done. I've been looking at meetings back from 2017 where Howard Franklin, who was the senior hydrologist at the time for the agency, presented to the Board of Supervisors a very detailed look at what they knew then about the deep aquifer. And it wasn't much different, I think, than it is now. And yet not very much has been done in the last 8 years to really stop what's going on there with the big extraction. So I'm just curious if you used or integrated any of that work that was done really almost 9 years ago. Thank you.
Yeah, so in the memo, we have a background section. It talks about those early, there's both a 2017 and a 2020 report prepared by the agency, and details the steps that have been taken since. One of the main recommendations of those earlier studies was to prepare the deep aquifer study. That was a very significant effort. Again, I shared that. There's information about both those earlier reports and a summary of the key findings of the deep aquifers in the memorandum. So we have looked at those earlier reports as part of the efforts of this group. So we were taking into account those earlier conversations. And then I see also Doug has his hand raised. I saw a question in the chat.
Yeah, I put a question on the chat. Do you have any new methods for raising the groundwater levels?
So we're going to be talking about the different actions, both interim actions and potential projects as part of this presentation. So we'll get to that in a minute. Okay. Any other questions in the room? All right, we'll keep going. Okay, so I think this is probably the most significant part of the presentation today. because these are the more near-term things that we're recommending. The projects, which we'll get to, are actions that are going to take a long time. Next slide. And so interim management actions are things that can both build on the content of the deep aquifer study, things that we can do now, and emphasizes the emphasis is really on what can we do in the meantime while we continue to evaluate projects and move things forward to actually undertaking some water supply projects if that's where things go. And so the key interim management actions that we're going to talk about are seawater intrusion response planning, demand management, and well permit. Okay, so came to a meeting about the deep aquifers, and then we're talking about seawater intrusion. But when you read the memo, and also if you are, looking at the information that we just submitted to DWR on the 180-400 foot aquifer subbasin plan, the issues with the deep aquifers in many ways are related to seawater intrusion. And that's kind of going to those earlier reports were from the agency, from Water Resources Agency, or about seawater intrusion, but then raising concerns about the deep aquifers. And you all, as well owners, probably know this better than I do. So as wells have become salty in the 180, there was a shift from the 180 into 400, and then wells have gotten salty in the 400, and there's been some shifting down into the deep aquifers. And so when we are thinking about managing the deep aquifers, and there's been previous concerns raised about the deep aquifers themselves become seawater intruded. And as we grappled with that question, we realized that really can't deal with the risk of seawater intrusion to the deep aquifers if we're not also looking at what's happening in the 400 and then in the remaining pumping that's occurring in the 180. So this concept of the seawater intrusion response plan was in part inspired because the Seaside Groundwater Basin Water Master did an update to their seawater intrusion response plan, which is in part related to their area of the deep aquifers. And we were looking at what they were considering a very different circumstance of pumping in the Seaside Basin and in some of the Marina Coast jurisdictional areas. There's a groundwater divide, and on this side of the groundwater divide, we didn't have any mechanism of kind of like if we're seeing seawater intrusion, what happens. So we've recommended that we do that, and this is going to be a process. We're still figuring out exactly what the work plan and steps are going to be, but the big picture steps are to think about having some triggers. So I think I wanted to acknowledge the Water Resources Agency does the seawater intrusion monitoring every year. There's a number of wells, and this has been stated multiple times in recent meetings, that are good wells that are still being pumped and utilized within the mapped area of seawater intrusion. And we've recognized that not all of the wells have the same chloride concentrations. There's a lot of variability in the chloride salty levels, and they change a little bit from year to year. So we need to think about where there's been a lot of kind of attention to the seawater intrusion minimum threshold, which under Sigma is defined, has to be defined by the ISO contour lines that the Water Resources Agency draws every year. I haven't looked that much or that closely at what's actually happening behind that area and within that area. So this would be paying a little bit closer attention in different ways, thinking about triggers for when are wells getting kind of on that closer look to becoming intruded, or having their concentrations really dramatically increase. What kinds of responses might be taken if that happens, if and when seawater intrusion is detected in those wells, and then what kinds of responses might we take. And there's a range of things here, next slide, that are yet to be determined. And this is a conversation that we're going to have to continue to have amongst the agencies, and that will be the subject of future workshops like this that are a little bit more hands-on, not a public meeting in quite the same way, but really kind of grappling with the issues a little more. And these are just some examples of potential response measures that we've identified and other types of seawater intrusion response plans from research we did during our discussion. And the goal is really to have some response actions if and when new wells become intruded. And it's something that's going to have to be coordinated across agencies. Okay, and then demand management. This is a topic that nobody likes. We've been having a lot of, we've done a lot of work on it. We've had a lot of kinds of conversations around demand management, looking at all of the different areas of the Williams Valley Basin jurisdiction. And last fall, our board adopted a framework for demand management. And that's not something that was actually dictating a specific action. It's really more of an outline of what are the different types of programs that might be implemented and how do we use the data of what are the groundwater conditions to drive where we're prioritizing certain types of action. So in the 180-400 foot aquifer subbasin, under that framework, it would be considered to be in stage 4 of the stages that were identified by the framework. And that is because of those multiple years of undesirable results, according to the SIGMA criteria and minimum thresholds that we have to report to the state. And so demand management is something that could be done until long-term projects are put in place. But we need to prioritize certain areas. And we're really prioritizing the area that we see to be the greatest risk is where there's seawater intrusion overlying the deep aquifer. So it is a kind of concentrated area. There is more of a concentration of wells in that area. The deep aquifers themselves are much bigger, but it's that relationship between seawater intrusion and deep aquifers that we're most concerned about. So in our agency's work plan in the next year, we're going to start to work on developing an allocation program for the deep aquifer pumping. Now, I don't think this is something that's particularly clear to some members of the public who are paying attention, but maybe not digging into all of the data. But the overall amount of pumping from the deep aquifers compared to the overall amount of pumping from the 400 is really pretty small by comparison to the pumping in the overlying aquifers. But the deep aquifer study recommended not having a net increase in the overall pumping. And so that's something that we're going to have to grapple with. And this is the particular work program that we're going to have to discuss. Go ahead and flip it. I think we're going to have to look at the total pumping, who the users are. We haven't dug into all of those details at this point in time. And there are public health and safety requirements for domestic usage. Those are the kinds of questions that we're going to need to grapple with. But again, I think this is where this group has had tough discussions amongst ourselves, that we have multiple authorities, areas of jurisdiction, and have to be respectful of those things and have to work together across jurisdictional boundaries. So there's a certain area that's within our agency's jurisdiction that does not include marine coast, but they're going to need to be part of the discussion, and similarly, the regulated utilities that are the water purveyors in the city of Salina and Casperville. So it is about the different uses and the different users, and then this is where, I think this is where we're gonna have the hardest conversation over the coming year or so. I haven't actually dug into this work, but we're giving you the heads up that this is some of the discussion that's coming. Now I'm gonna ask Marie Coe to just talk a little bit about the demand management that they're already doing in their area.
So good afternoon. My name is Patrick Green with the Maricopa Water District. And so as you're looking at here, one of the biggest things that we've been doing for the last 30 years is trying to lower our demand. And the numbers you're seeing on there is our total demand, and it's reflecting generally level, but it's increasing as you guys can see all the housing that's going to us. But that's our one of the strategies that's been in place because we predated Sigma. We predated a lot of these additional regulations that were coming online. In terms of our responses and how we will address seawater, there's some options there in terms of we've increased our monitoring of seawater by it's quarterly now by us, and our monitoring network is vast. That we've been lucky enough to get a lot of the old former Fort Ord wells. Not all of them are applicable to the deep aquifer, but our seawater intrusion monitoring network has grown immensely. And so we're really working hard on building out our monitoring program because we're so close to the coast. We've been kind of living this issue for many years. And so we're constantly evaluating our production wells in terms of how we're spreading out our pumping. Our nearest wells to the coast are roughly 2 miles, and they are deep wells. They were built in the late 80s. Our farthest wells are all the way 5.5 miles inland. Well, I should say singular, and it's actually closer to Highway 68 than it is to the coast. And so what we do with our new SCADA system, our newish SCADA system, our SCADA system always being improved, is that we're trying to rest our deep wells to the greatest extent possible with our rotations. And since we have some good geography to work with in terms of spreading that out, we try to give, the longest period possible between when we pump our deep wells and hopefully lessen any impacts that we can do. And as you see there, there's kind of the 3 bullet points. And then if we do happen to see increased fluoride in a certain area, we can then evaluate and adjust quickly with our SCADA system to be able to hopefully retard any progression of any seawater. Thank you.
Okay, I'll briefly go over what we do when we get a well application. Each application comes in, we do a SQL review, which is normally an study. We go through that, and it tells us exactly where or what needs to be done as far as that application. In the case of a couple of well applications for replacement wells, the deep aquifer, the findings were that we needed a full EIR, and that is in the process right now. EHB is in the process also of updating our county well code 1508. Hopefully that we have that completed and out to post review by mid-summer.
Okay. Question. Mr. Bunn. We have, I'm sorry, we have a lot of people online, so we're going to ask you to use a microphone so that they can hear you.
Thank you. I'm David Dunn with the Farm Test. This is a question / comment. This may be something hard to address. It's worthwhile raising this discussion, especially when you're talking about interim local management responsibility. Have you, as a group or have some of your agencies, thought about drilling down more on seawater island people know about it, and it's been studied, and I think people are aware of it. But if you're looking at interim steps, interim responses, it seems like we ought to take a harder look at that, because that's where there's leakage happening in the 400 And it's generally understood that it's probably because of a couple of wells that were operated in steel. So at this point, would it be worthwhile, like setting up a task force or really like going back to that? And, hey, this might be worth some extra money to go and find these wells. It'd be expensive in a short-term way, looking at it, but it could be very, very cheap if it has the effect of stopping or slowing down. So that's a question.
I'm going to jump in, but I'm going to ask maybe if Amy could speak a little bit about well destruction program.
Certainly, thank you, Sarah. So that's a great suggestion, David. And I think the agency still has a grant-funded well destruction program for eliminating wells that could be acting as conduits for movement of seawater intrusion. So we've been able to extend that for another couple of years. So we have through 2027 where we can still get that funding. So I think you make a great point. It may be a good time to renew outreach to some of the well owners there because we started this program 4 years ago now, I think. So there may be conditions have changed. That might be a good mechanism for getting rid of some of those wells that could be out there and possibly properly constructed.
Oh, I'm sorry. I'm getting someone saying, please speak up. So I think that's the microphone.
I just wanted to thank Amy for that comment. And the program has been great, and she's doing a great job. I think there is at least discussion in the Amazon land that there's a couple of wells possibly that have already been destroyed that are probably the cause of this contamination. And of course, nobody knows for sure. But I don't think we think that there is some existing wells that have been destroyed yet that are possible. Of course, we don't know for sure. I'm not saying that the respectable dot on this, but I think that's something that not particularly deep to the subject would be worth some of that.
Katie, I'm getting some messages online that people couldn't hear during the microphone speaking, so I'm going to just try to recapture what you said. So the discussion has been around some of the wells that had actually been destroyed in the 400-foot aquifer. There is, maybe you all have some information that we could dig into a little bit more, and for us to dig into a little bit more about other opportunities or places for well destruction from particular areas of concern, that especially in the island of the 400-foot aquifer. So we agree that's a great suggestion, and I think also as the county moves into its well ordinance amendments, do we need to strengthen sort of some well destruction requirements in certain circumstances where there's known seawater intrusion, for making sure that we're being preventative. I have spoken with some other agencies in the state, and they've pointed to their well having a really active well destruction program as being key to their seawater intrusion management. Thank you for that.
Question for Roger. Are there any wells that are can be deep as well as 100?
No, all the deep wells are only perked in the deep aquifer. There's none that are perked in 4 and deep. So the deep wells are all perked just in.
Doctor, I think we have records of wells that are perforated in both aquifers. I know that we have that in our data. So I'm saying Abby at me over there, and Abby, please need a microphone. Can you do a microphone test?
You can hear me on the Zoom. Can you hear me?
Could folks online hear that?
Test.
Barely. I just have to really speak into the microphone.
Right. We can double back. I think, Roger, you're talking about that main area by where that island, the 400-foot intrusion is that right? Yeah, in the broader deep aquifer, there are wells farther away that are in the 400 and deep.
Right.
But in that area, correct.
They're not in the seawater.
Correct.
I was trying to be specific.
Any other questions? Yes.
Hi, Martin Radry with Ramco Enterprises. I guess more of a decision-making process here. Since there are 4 agencies involved, are all of you covered by the coordination agreement? Between, I guess, Marina Coast and the GSA, Salinas Valley GSA and the Marina Coast GSA, more 4 agencies involved, kind of, everybody have equal power to it?
We are working together. There's no coordination agreement that is formal. Since the study that was collectively prepared and adopted or approved by all of the 4 agencies, governing bodies, we have been working as a working group. But at some point, we do need to. Well, there's certain things that have been. So the monitoring plan was also approved by all agencies. So that's the plan going forward. But anything formal, we are going to apply for having it consistent and applicable to all agencies.
Yeah, correct. And it could be perhaps you're referring to the memorandum of understanding that was drafted around the monitoring plan, which just memorializes the commitment that Brett was talking about, and also includes 4 of us, and then also includes monitoring water management district and seaside basin as well. So deep extends into that space, and so one way or another, we're sharing data, we're sharing ideas, and we're trying to better understand from the monitoring perspective, not the management side. What can we do to enhance our understanding? So that might be it.
Right. Thank you.
I'm not seeing any new hands raised online. There are 2 hands raised that were from the last. Okay. Okay, so Doug?
No, this is a new raised hand.
Okay, please go ahead.
Yeah, have you considered injection wells? In other words, taking water from that little dam on the Salinas River and pumping it into the aquifers to raise the level, or even taking reclaimed water from the sewage plant and injecting it in?
We have thought about that. That's going to be the next section of the presentation. Yeah. Mr. Light?
Yeah, thank you. Mine was a new raised hand too. Probably, some of us may have multiple questions, so hopefully that's not held against us. Just on Monday, it was said that deep aquifer pumping reductions may need to be greater than 45% to avoid undesirable results and seawater intrusion into the deep aquifer, which I might add it has been designated as a sort of emergency backup, but it's not really being treated like one. So why aren't existing deep well owners being required to reduce some pumping by some percentage? Maybe it's not 45%. And why aren't they being charged fees, extraction fees for extracting from this very vulnerable backup resource, really for urban users more so than agriculture? And I would also just say, again, going back to 2017-18, why are the supervisors not imposing an immediate temporary moratorium in this coastal risk area that's at stage 4, as you just said, for both new and replacement deep aquifer wells, unless the applicant can clearly and scientifically prove that there's no net increase in deep aquifer pumping, or there's no increase to seawater intrusion risk? Because all this monitoring and planning, it's not reduction. This is a strategic reserve that's not protected while new straws are still being added. So I'd appreciate your candidness on why the supervisors aren't imposing an immediate temporary moratorium, and why we're not charging high fees for those that are extracting from the deep aquifer. Thank you.
I'm happy to.
Well, Brett Harmon, I cannot speak for supervisors. I do not work for them, and they certainly do not work for me. But in terms of what GSA can do, that is exactly what we're talking about. It is very precious resource we have. We need to protect it. We don't want to do anything hastily. We want to make sure that we are planning for long term, and we are hoping that a project or projects could be something that helps not only deep aquifers, but several aquifers in this area. So we're looking for the best combination of projects and management actions, including demand management in deep aquifers. There I was just speaking for that this upcoming year, starting July, because if we want to do demand management, if we need to do allocation, it needs to be developed. It's not as easy as just turning it off and on. And so that is a work we're going to be launching, just in a few months here to see what is the most appropriate framework and approach for that.
Just to quickly address the question about fees on pumpers and the Marine Coast assessment, Marine Coast GSA is assessing a $350 and change assessment against itself to fund the GSA work. So we are assessing a fee against ourselves for pumping from all.
Mr. Light brought up an interesting note. Since the Salinas Valley Basin and its sub-basins are all fed from the Knox Mountain and San Antonio, why does the county continue to allow more ground being developed and more wells being put in when we don't have enough water for the current users and the current ratepayers for the water sources that are provided?
I think we can't speak for the county supervisors themselves, but I think that these are the types of policy issues that are going to come up. And Rick move forward with their role as the well permitting. I think that's all we can say for now. Okay, keep going. Okay, Mr. LeBeau.
Yes, good afternoon, Sarah and everybody in there. And can you guys hear me okay? First of all?
Yeah.
If I heard correctly, declining water tables are a concern of yours because you're worried about leakage from the overlying aquifers that impaired water from above could leak down and affect the deep aquifer. Is that what I heard earlier?
Yes, that's part of what you heard. I think there's a couple different things. I can ask Ms. Woodrow to help weigh in on this. The deep aquifers are under pressure, and so the way the groundwater levels behave is related to them being under pressure. But we have generally seen the groundwater levels themselves go down. And then we're concerned because where water used to be flowing upward, now it's flowing downward, the gradient of the pressure. Yeah, it's very.
So it somewhat implies that there may be vulnerability of the underlying aquitard below the 400 to leak. And if that's the case, I'm really concerned with the preferred project to achieve sustainability in the pressure area involves greatly increasing the pressure in the 400 to artificial levels that it's never been exposed to. And we may be perhaps risking forcing leakage down into the deep aquifer. That's my personal opinion. My second comment is you're trying to address declining water levels, and you're defining the area of impact as where there is seawater intrusion now, and you're going to draw an imaginary line. Now, if I'm south of that line, I can pump as much as I want from the deep aquifer. I can use twice as much water to produce the same crops as somebody living in that new moratorium zone. My point is, I think you have to look at the basin holistically, Sarah. And if you're going to try to reduce the impact of declining water levels and pumping, it has to apply to the bad actors and the good actors, anybody extracting from the deep aquifer. So thank you.
Okay, we're gonna go on to the next part of the presentation. Oh, go ahead, Mr. Dean. Could you, yeah.
And another comment on fees for extractions. I agree. Let's set a fee all the way from San Ardo, every single municipality, every farmer, everybody. Let's put a fee on all the water that is being let down through the valley from Knoxville and San Antonio. Let's collect a fee. Let's use those fees to fund projects. Use those fees to better improve our water infrastructure.
Okay, so we're gonna move now into projects and okay.
So this next slide is to cover some of the Marina Coast GSA projects that we're pursuing to address the Monterey Subbasin, and in particular, in this particular area, is what's known as the Marine Ore area of the basin. And so what you're looking at here is that's just a picture of some old Army infrastructure that we're going to repurpose to begin our indirect potable reuse project or program is really what we're looking at. We're looking at a kind of a phased approach where we're going to start at what's called the sand tank. It's a sand tank because the Army had an old well that used to draw sand, and that tank used to fill up with sand to where they had to dig it out every year. So anyways, and the first phase will be roughly 1,000 to 1,100 acre feet of injection for the Monterey, because what we're trying to do is our overdraft is roughly around 1,600 acre feet a year based on our water budget in our GSP plan. And so we're going to start with that. And then our other thing that we're doing, which is very active, you may have seen General Manager Scherzinger on KSBW promoting it, is our desalination plant that is on the coast over here. It's referred to as a pilot plant because of the water is desalinated and the brine is re-injected into the dune sand or the dune sand near the desalination plant. So it's kind of we avoid some of the brine issues that come along with desalination facilities. And the first phase of that will be about roughly 300 acre feet, which in the grand scheme of things to all of you is not very much money, but to us, for our water balance, it gets us a long way. And so the next is just advancing more of the projects that we would inject into the deep aquifer. And then, as I mentioned earlier, it's the continuing with our SCADA program to really analyze, look at our cones of depression, look at what's happening with the deep, look at what's happening with our other extractions where they may be in areas that are intrusive. And so we're trying to continually improve and be as good a stewards as we can. Thank you.
How does that tie in with M1 water?
What do you mean?
The potable reuse, how does that tie in with M1 water?
So you may know, Mr. Scatini, that Marina Coast is a partial owner in Pure Water Monterey, but we have rights to 600 acre feet. Inside Pure Water Monterey, there's actually 1 MGD, which is 1120 acre feet that's available, and our return rights pursuant to the annexation give us access to all the water that Marina Coast delivers. So as we mature that process, IPR number 1, the sand tank, will utilize that first tranche. As we move to the IPRs 2 and 3, 4th Street or well 9 and 4th Street, we'll use what we know in the contract is phase 2, which is 827 acre feet of additional water. And then should the district want to continue to pursue that supply, right now we're delivering about 2 to 3 million gallons a day of wastewater to M1 water. We have that recovery right, so that's 2240 acre feet a year. So we're going to continue to mature that project. But for us right now, under the GSP. The number we're shooting for is 1,690 per people. That's our trip line, and then we'll see what happens beyond.
So, Salinas Valley Basin GSA and the Water Resources Agency have been working together. We've both helped support Water Resources Agency with funding, and then we've done some studies jointly. And so the CSIP enhancements, the CSIP optimization projects that have been presented by the agency in various meetings over the last 6 months or so, really were intended to help reduce the reliance on the supplemental groundwater pumping in the CSIP system, ways to help with the pressures in the system, which are sort of augmented by the supplemental wells, especially in the further outreaches of the CSIP system, and creating additional storage so that you can make the most of the recycled water that's available to the agency and the CSIP system, but isn't able to be fully used just because of timing and the lack of storage in the system. And I will look to Laura and Amy and Shauna if you want to say more about that. But I think that's we do, if we're looking at this seawater intrusion response plan, and we're looking at within the seawater intruded area, and CSIP does have supplemental groundwater pumping that, finding ways to reduce the reliance on the groundwater for that system as our lowest hanging fruit project, I think, right now. And then we've looked further at expanding CSIP or building a parallel system. And that's the map that's shown here is that new seawater intrusion project sort of study area that we identified. And we did, in our work on that feasibility study, want to prioritize finding replacement supplies for agricultural deep aquifer pumping. And so the sort of the phasing of that project could be targeted towards providing supplemental supplies for those of you who are reliant on the deep aquifer wells. So that's one project that really had some targeted emphasis on the deep aquifers. We did look at injection in both the Aquifer Storage and Recovery project and the brackish groundwater restoration project. Both of those have injection components to them. I think some good comments have been made about things that would need to be studied further related to injection as those projects move forward. Really understanding the aquifer characteristics for injection would be one of the first sort of piloting activities that would be needed. But that is also a way to help augment the groundwater supply by putting treated water back into the ground for the users, the overlying groundwater users. So both of those projects have that kind of built into them, both ASR and the brackish groundwater restoration project. The latter project is the project we've identified that has at this point, our best opportunity to reduce the seawater intrusion and reduce the chloride mass within the intruded area. But I know there's a lot of concern about the brackish groundwater restoration project, but one thing for you all to think about with that project is the way in which it might help really clean up the aquifer over time and make some of your 400-foot wells in better condition than they are currently. That would be over time, not immediately, but one of the potential benefits of that project. So those are big capital endeavors. They're going to take time to get through all of the steps that would be required for them to actually be constructed and put online. There's uncertainty with what that process looks like moving into the future. We're going to have to commit as a community to moving forward on some projects, regardless of the cost, if we want to keep the state out of our hair. And so I just kind of go on to the next slide. But I just want to say that, you know, our agency is the one in the hot seat with DWR over the GSP for the 180-400. We're the responsible agency. We do have coordination agreement with Marina Coast for the 180-400. Water Resources Agency and the county have been long involved with addressing seawater intrusion. So we're not going to be able to successfully deal with any of it alone. And those are going to be long-term endeavors, but if we don't show the state that we're serious about doing something, we have a whole other set of risks to consider. So I just want to put that out there. Any other questions about those projects? Yes.
Quick question for you. I was wondering what the kind of the hydrology between the Marina Coast Water District and the 180-400. I know it seems like the underground aquifer is kind of connected. So when it comes to like kind of the topic today, the management of these deep aquifer wells, are the two agencies going to work together to kind of follow the same guidelines? Are you kind of operating separately at your different GSAs? I'm just trying to understand how the policy will kind of traverse the underground hydrology, because I think some of Marina's wells are off Reservation Road right next to some ag wells. So I don't know if it just seems like they're connected, so it seemed kind of odd the two GSAs are kind of taking a different approach and treating the aquifer differently.
So that's a great question. So to the earlier point, Martin, is the districts so both GSAs were currently operating under a 357.2 intertrade basin agreement. So we have steering committees. We're working together. Marina Coast has actually two GSAs. We're a GSA in the Monterey Subbasin as well as Queens Valley Basin, and then we're also a GSA in the 184. So we're bound on that, essentially on that event boundary.
So, yeah, and I think this is a comment I've heard quite a bit at community meetings in the last whatever amount of time I've been working on these issues. That you know, the boundaries, we have these political lines that were drawn for subbasins. I think that the subbasin boundaries were defined by the Department of Water Resources Agency people within 118. They have whatever were the mechanisms for how they define those lines. Some were political kinds of lines, or just like easy kind of lines. You can tell how they were drawn on a map. It doesn't necessarily mean that the underlying layers of geology have these breaking points of what the lines are on the ground, above ground. So in the Monterey subbasin, there are corresponding principal aquifers, which is how the Sustainable Groundwater Management Act has a lot of language associated with it, a little bit jargony, but each of the groundwater sustainability plans, so the Monterey groundwater subbasin groundwater sustainability plan and the 180-400 foot aquifer groundwater sustainability plan, both define what are the principal aquifers in each of those subbasins. And the Monterey subbasin plan identifies that the Marina Ord area and shares the geology with the 180-400 at that boundary. And so the lower groundwater levels in the 180-400 foot aquifer subbasin and the seawater intrusion issues are both kind of interrelated. We have sustainability criteria set in each of the plans, and I was digging into this with our consultants the other day. They're generally set in the same location, with some slight differences just because of the way the mapping was done by Marina Coast. The seawater intrusion line is defined at 2015 in the Monterey plan. It's set at 2017 in the 180-400 plan. But when you look at the way the lines were drawn, they generally correspond. So that's like one example. But I think that's part of our point here with the deep aquifers is really it's a geology layer that crosses multiple jurisdictional boundaries. And we want to think about it as a geologic unit. And we can only do that if we're working together across jurisdictions.
Can I add, just a, maybe more specifically, Sigma talks about measurable depth vector goal and then minimum threshold, which is the basement don't want to go under. Generally, we've set ours for the 2015 drought, and that's in large measure where the Salinas Valley has set their objectives and minimum thresholds. So there is a coordination. Salinas Valley doesn't have any wells where they're going to coordinate the pumping or reduce the pumping in some sort of form of fashion where we own our wells and control. So it's in the plan where that dovetailing of the agency is.
But this question kind of relates to the quality is maybe not the right word, but the quality of the data you guys aggregated to come up with the lowering of the water level within the deep aquifers. So we know that within the 180 and then the 400, there's fingers or pockets of good fresh water, up into basically the Salinas River, edge of marina area. And in those areas, the formation in those aquifers are, relatively similar, but there's just, some areas where there's better water than others and higher water levels. Within the deep aquifer, we see that like the Marina Coast, the Monterey Formation you guys are talking about, it's mostly sands that you guys have in the deep aquifers, whereas if you move out in the valley, there's some fairly substantial gravel beds in the deep aquifers. Have you guys seen a relatively uniform decrease in the elevation of the waters out in those deep aquifers across the 180, 400 and in Monterey, or is it more sporadic?
That's a good question. So there certainly is well by well variability, and there are some parts of the 180, 400 where the wells behave more similarly than others. I think for how the data are used, we collect everything on a well by well basis. When, for example, the Water Resources Agency, when we produce groundwater elevation contours, there's some interpolation between those data points to try to get that bigger regional picture of how things are changing. But all of that individual point data is considered and accounted for. So there are some differences, I think, maybe between the more generalized regional maps that you might see, but all of that variability is kind of part of the picture when we're looking at maybe specific management actions or projects. That helps answer your question a little bit.
Yeah, sort of. I guess what I'm getting at is where Marina Coast Water has to evaluate most of their waters within a deep aquifer coming out of basically sand formation. Where there are gravel formations in the deep aquifers deeper into the 180, 400 subbasin, are there areas that are being consistently significantly less affected in terms of a decrease in water elevation versus the rest of that deep aquifer formation that might be worthwhile looking at? Is like, hey, are we monitoring? Do we have enough monitoring wells to be able to aggregate enough information to make sure that the quality information we're using to evaluate the groundwater levels dropping is accurate? And I'm not trying to make a point, I'm just generally questioning.
No, that's a good question. And I think in some areas we have a very good coverage of wells. There are, because a lot of the monitoring the Water Resources Agency does, we do have some dedicated monitoring wells that are just for that purpose, but we rely very heavily on privately owned many agricultural wells. So there are spaces within the deep aquifers where we have fewer data points. So I think there's room for improvement. There were a few spots, I think there was a map earlier in the slide where there were a few specific data gaps that were identified, and particularly in some of the more coastal portions of the deep aquifers, there are some data gaps there as well. So we are looking to improve that. So not a straight yes or no answer to your question. In some places, I think it's really good. In other places, we could use more information.
I'll just add that in the reporting annual reports that we do each year, the reporting requires hydrographs for each of the wells that we monitor. And so if you really want to dig into the data and kind of see the different monitoring points of where there might be some variability, it isn't exactly the same across the board. So I think, you all know as well, owners, like there's different operational conditions. Sometimes you pump more, sometimes you pump less. Sometimes you're using, as Marina Coast does, different wells and letting some rest, and that affects the responses of the aquifers. And so it's not always uniform. It's not always perfect data. We have made some pretty good improvements to the overall monitoring coverage over the last couple of years. I think that's something we can, even though monitoring is just monitoring, it's not action. We're not going to be successful working with you all if there's still just a lot of questions about the data. So we're happy to help you dig into it if you want.
Is there a quota or moratorium on more deep wells into the deep aquifer that they're not being allowed until everything gets settled?
So there was a moratorium. It was adopted by the Board of Supervisors in 2018. It was in place until 2020. And when they considered extending it, it didn't count. So it was lifted at that time. It was originally put in place as an interim moratorium until the deep aquifer study was completed. The supervisors and the county have not taken that question up again since that time. So there are two pending applications. I'll let Roger speak to that.
So yes, you could still turn in an application for a well in the deep, but it would come to us. We would do our CEQA review, which is initially the initial study, and like the two applications that we have right now that are in EIR, they would require an EIR because of the findings that we would come upon.
I'm sorry, what are the odds of the EIR being approved to proceed with establishing that permit?
We're just in the initial part of the EIR. It's going to take probably several months before we get into the presentation. Once they get all the data completed, then we would go to the Board of Supervisors and give them the findings.
So we're looking several months, hopefully this year.
The hope is this year, but can't promise it.
Thank you.
I'm not seeing other questions, so let's just go on to our last couple slides here. So I think we've covered this greatly over the meeting, that there are multiple agencies that have authority within the deep aquifer extent, and we are working together as a starting point on the monitoring program, and then together on this memorandum that's available on our website. I think we'll have the link to it in a minute. And then I just want to say that, the Department of Water Resources has identified the 400 foot aquifer subbasin as critically overdrafted. And that is driven really by the seawater intrusion issue and the deep aquifer undesirable results we're seeing at this point in time. And if we want to be successful in retaining our local control, we're going to need to work together on these interim actions that we discussed today. They are going to be difficult sort of things that I think have been largely avoided up to this point, but that we're at a point where we are going to need to start taking some action. And so how do we get there? You know, I think what we want you all to know is that we're going to do that through the existing processes that you all are already familiar with. We're going to do it through implementation of our GSPs. We're doing amendments to our GSPs to review the plans that have been approved with the 5 years worth of data. There's a lot of new information from the study that's going to help us refine how our sustainability criteria is set at this point in time. We've been doing a lot of technical studies. That's information that's out there for you all. And then we have these existing permitting and regulatory authorities that also come into play, and that this coordination amongst us all is what's going to make us successful as a community across multiple jurisdictions. So when we met over these slides, and we wanted to just have some way of illustrating the activities from here forward, we put together this graphic that kind of puts the 4 main areas of work on these issues that will continue on this chart, so that you can see that these are things that we're going to need to be doing concurrently at the same time, and the focus in this next year especially is going to be on the seawater intrusion response plan, looking at demand management, the well permitting, well obstruction, things we've already talked about, and then continuing to move forward on those long-term supply projects. And this is showing, you know, the design, environmental review, and permitting phase. That's really not going to happen for projects until we know which projects we're going to move forward. And that's a very active discussion happening at our advisory committee. I think many of you are probably tracking that, but please do watch where that conversation is really focused right now. And the county will be working on its processes related to well permits, and then we'll be working together on monitoring. I just wanted to show you that this is where things are going from here. And I think that is our last slide. Just open it up for further discussion. Both the Deep Aquifer study and the memo are available on this website, and then also on other agencies' websites.
My name is John Piney with Piney Realty, and with the seawater intrusion problem that we're having and the need to do something, or is it a requirement to do something? It seems that the demand management will be the quickest method without the cost of a project. And by demand management, I understand that means cutbacks in pumping usage. Have they, I've been hearing there's going to be 50% cutbacks, you're going to get 1 acre foot. I mean, it's all over the board of what I'm hearing as far as what you're going to be allowed to pump. When do you think, you know, the public will know what those pumping requirements are? I don't know if you have it now or.
So we have a lot of studies done. We have a lot of modeling done that kind of shows us how much cutback would be necessary if we try to achieve the minimum threshold just through demand management. We also have learned that no amount of demand management is going to be enough to address the seawater intrusion by the 2040 timeline. So it's a really difficult challenge. We can get there through demand management if we are looking at achieving minimum thresholds for groundwater levels, but not seawater intrusion. So my thinking is, these are the people, all of you, all of the groundwater users potentially that we need to be helping to fund at least partially any of the projects that will ultimately be approved. So why would I cut you down in terms of your ability to earn income if I need to rely on you to be funding some projects? So it's a balancing act and using demand management where it makes sense, either like deep aquifers, because we need to protect it. We do not want to be in a situation where deep aquifers now are contaminated by seawater. It's so much harder to clean it up than it's protect it. We need to do something here. The rest of it, it's a balancing act. And by August, that's what I've told my board, is that the staff is bringing an item to the SVB GSA board in August and asking them to make a decision on choosing a suite of project and management actions. There may be a demand management component in there if the projects that are chosen cannot achieve all of the goals that we have, but not, it needs to be looked very holistically where it fits in and where it makes sense.
If a project is like the brackish water program, if that's constructed 10 years from now, in the interim, we have some other plans too, but they seem like they're monthly capital projects. Would it be, and then I guess getting back to the demand management, it's kind of the only interim project or interim solution that you have? Or are there other interim solutions that don't require a capital cost?
That's the only management action. We do have some projects such as the C6 optimization that could be much quicker implemented and constructed. The demand management, so we're calling the portfolios, the suites of project and management actions. The few we shared with advisory committee as an initial starting point. We did have 10% demand management just as a placeholder, but we can, that's why we really have this great tool of groundwater model that we can put in there. If a project comes online 2032, 2035, meanwhile, doing 10% demand management versus not doing it, what are the benefits of it? But then what are also the economic and financial impacts of putting people through that 10 years of demand management? So I think we have those two tools, groundwater model and economic model, that we're going to be using to really right size and make hopefully the best decision for the community.
Thank you.
Not seeing any other raised hands in the room or online. So I think that will conclude our meeting. Really appreciate everyone coming. Very happy to see a broader set of folks here today. So thank you for spending some time with us.